g'day, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
G'day, Greg. How are you?
I'm very well. Now, you're joining us here on the Rum Rebellion site for the first time. I thought we'd just give listeners a bit of context as to why we're having this chat. I came across your newsletter, Cory Bernardi Confidential, probably 12 months ago, and I've been reading it ever since. Really enjoyed the content, and given that there's a lot of similarities between the things that you're writing about and what we write about here in the Rum Rebellion, I thought it'd be great to have a chat. And you've also agreed to give us, I guess, one of your essays once a week, just to give people an idea of the sort of things that you're writing about. But before we get into those topics and your newsletter, I thought maybe just give people a bit of an idea of who you are and your background for those who may not know you.
Yeah, I'll give you the truncated version. When I left school, I wanted to be a professional sports person. I went off rowing, and I was in the Australian rowing team. I ended up hurting my back, so I went overseas and worked internationally for a German company and spent a lot of time in the Middle East and experiencing different cultures and different values. Came back to Australia, bought a pub, and I'd picked up tuberculosis in the Middle East. And so I spent a year in isolation and thought, what the heck am I going to do with my life? And found myself drawn to politics and spent 15 years as basically as a senator for South Australia. Loved it, left nothing on the table, played as hard as I possibly could in that space. And then, eventually I said, no, I've done my bit, time to start a new career and do something different. So I was 50, I left Parliament. The coronavirus pandemic came along. I thought, what am I going to do? So I started writing again, because I'd been blogging for the last 10 years and enjoyed it, and started this little Cory Bernardi Confidential, now doing some work with Sky News as well.
That was a very truncated version. Perhaps we could maybe dig into it a little bit more, just in terms of the political career. So you started with a Liberal Party, but then became a bit disillusioned there, and then went out on your own to try to create your own political movement. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, a little bit disillusioned with them. I got into the politics because I believe in smaller government, lower taxes, free enterprise, deregulation, all of those things.
Classical liberal ideals, right?
Well, they historically have been, but they've been pretty much abandoned, I think, in more recent times. And so we went through a process, what we in the business called the Troubles, when you had Malcolm Turnbull undermining Tony Abbott, and Tony wasn't perfect by any stretch, but he was the Prime Minister, duly elected. Turnbull was a Labor bloke who, infiltrated a Liberal Party. And in the end, I thought it was just going in the wrong direction. And so there was what I saw as an anchor, what was going to sort of lock them into a centre-right mainstream position, maybe through ego or hubris or whatever. I thought, well, that might be a role I can play to remind them about being their better selves. I'd tried it within the party. We built actually a pretty big movement. We had 20,000+ members, paid members. We had a pretty slick and professional outfit, and everything fell to bits actually when Scott Morrison became leader over Malcolm Turnbull, because rightly or wrongly, people perceived that he was more centre-right than Turnbull was, and that we had a pretty bad election result. And for me, that was defining. It just said, well, why keep flogging a dead horse? Maybe now there would be an opportunity to resurrect it if someone had the motivation. But it just seemed that at the time the Liberal Party had returned to where it should have been.
Well, given that you've just said that, we had an election in 2018 where Morrison and the Liberals were elected on relatively centre-right platform. But ever since that time, we've seen the government move further to the left. So, and we're starting to see a bit of fracturing in the main political spectrum. I think there's been a couple of defections from the Libs into the Liberal Democrats. So there's obviously still this issue in the Liberal Party about the direction it's going, and the main body of it seems to be moving to the left, where there's still a couple of I guess you'd call it principled politicians, which want to stay true to classical liberal principles, as you just mentioned, small government, lower regulation, that sort of stuff. Where do you think the political scene is going, given that we've got this sort of movement to the left from the Morrison government over the past year or so?
Yeah, it's government. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say politics now is really have been commandeered by the careerists or those who are professional managers. And so they just go in there, they're ticking boxes, they're not fighting the bureaucracy. And very few of them have this ideological fire within their bellies. And if you ask a lot of them, you say, why do you want to be a politician? They go, oh, I want to make change. You know, what sort of change do you want to make? Oh, I want to represent people. You know, they can't crystallize what they want to do. And so if you have a look at the Liberal Party, for example, you've got a whole bunch of them that are advocates now for quotas or for saying we need to meet net zero emissions. They'll look at anything the United Nations does and says, oh, yeah, that's great. Let's do that. We don't want to be criticised. Half of them will say, let's not upset China because, you know, China's our meal ticket, or our post-parliamentary meal ticket, I should say. And they just haven't got the courage of their convictions. And so you think for a centre-right party, how are they ever going to maintain that when it's an ever leftward drift? The Greens have been dragging Labor to the left, and Labor are dragging the Liberals to the left. You've got the media then that, of course, are doing the same thing. Anything that is like a commitment to traditional values or a commitment to normality is somehow pilloried and demonised as being racist, sexist, you know, homophobic, whatever you want to call it. They will just label it to discredit the individuals. And then, of course, you couple that and you say the pandemic came in, which we could have an extensive discussion about this pandemic because a lot of stuff doesn't add up there. But that changed. I think it gave an excuse for governments to abandon any single principle. And that's why we've seen hundreds of billions of dollars added to the debt. We're going to have $1 trillion plus debt. I think we'll have deficits as far as the eye can see. People now are expecting money just to be thrown at them by governments. No principle is being upheld. And I'll give you one example. In South Australia last week, the government there, a Liberal government, or Liberal in name only, said if you went to a particular restaurant and you'd scanned in with a QR code, which is their tracking system, rather than being able to quarantine at home, they now sent police around to take you from your home with your family, whether your family were there at the restaurant or not, to incarcerate you, which they would say it's in a Medi hotel, but it might as well be in a jail. You're not allowed to leave, and you're not allowed to leave until they say you can leave. There's no judge, there's no jury, there's no trial, there's no conviction. You've done absolutely nothing wrong. This is the sort of jackboot Gestapo tactics that we've seen in history prior, and people are just accepting it. I think it's appalling, and I think we're on a very, very dangerous slope, a precedent that was being set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things, and you mentioned the pandemic, so let's talk about that. But, you know, just going back to what you mentioned, I mean, states all around the country have had to decree these states of emergency in order to, I guess, implement these rules, and these rules that would otherwise just be, you know, rejected out of hand. How long do you think these state of emergencies, these rolling state of emergencies, can continue to allow these state governments to, you know, we're effectively running under a health bureaucracy / tyranny at the moment, where we do not have the rights that we are entitled to. So how long do you think that can continue before people start to really sort of rise up and say enough is enough?
Yeah, that's a $64 question. It'll continue from the politicians' point of view as long as they can get away with it. And again, Premier Marshall, or Marshmallow as we call him down here, he wanted to make it a permanent fixture, as did Dan Andrews. Yep. So if that happened, I mean, we're in all sorts of trouble, but fortunately it didn't. But the people don't seem to care, Greg, and this is what concerns me. I mean, after the last week's announcement about we're going to remove you from your home, I thought people would be upset about this. But either they're unaware or they're just happy to have these extra days of holidays and think, oh, well, I get paid. You know, 1 in 7 people or something in South Australia are employed in the public service, and they haven't suffered anything. They're getting their pays, they're getting pay rises every year. They get to not work at home by just hanging around and doing whatever it is. And why would they complain? It's the small business owner that is the one that has been absolutely screwed over by this. And anyone that's, you know, got money invested in a business has been done in by politicians. And I think that's a hugely scary precedent. But until the punters wake up that their freedoms have evaporated or been taken away, politicians will keep pushing this barrow as long as they possibly can. And that's it can be a very long time indeed.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. And I think one of the other things that really plays to this is the fear angle that has been promoted and used so persistently by the media, and whether that's rewriting government press releases or focusing mostly on these daily press gatherings by the health authorities that are, peddling this fear on a daily basis, that I think people genuinely are very, very scared and therefore think that the politicians are acting in our best interest. Now, people like you and I who may have studied politics in a little bit more depth and political history know quite well that politicians do not have your best interests at heart, that effectively their main motivation is to stay in power. So I guess my question here is, to what extent have the politicians created this environment where they can't back down from it, because they have created so much fear that even if we decide to go to, living with this virus rather than the zero strategy that's currently sort of pursued, how can they back away from that now that they've created so much fear?
It's a really good question. And, I think when they first started, they were operating from a position of limited knowledge, right? And so they swallowed what the World Health Organization trotted out, and Fauci and others, and they called this flu-like virus, some catastrophic thing that was going to kill us all. So they responded accordingly. But as the evidence and the facts have come along, they've kind of doubled down in this. They've identified this is not the massive threat that the world has come to expect. We've dealt with these things in the past. I'll give you one example, right? 2019 in South Australia, I think 32 people died in one day from a flu epidemic. And the same chief health officer now, who's locking us down and, can't get enough of the camera, her advice to people was, oh yeah, it's a bit sad that people have died, but, maybe if we sneeze into our elbows, it'll all be okay. Now, that's 32 people died. In South Australia, I reckon we've had 4 people die this year, and one of those was from the vaccine. So there's a completely disproportionate response, but they've dug themselves in so deep that they won't admit they've made a mistake. And so are they just going to keep ploughing on and doubling down in all of this, or will they try and mitigate it by saying, oh, we've got enough vaccinations, we can do this in X, Y, Z? Eventually they'll have to do that, but we could have a lot more pain before they do.
Now, in your writings on this, I know you devote quite a lot of time to the pandemic response and criticism of it. I noticed that you've, sure the best way to put it, but you've raised the issue that, is this just a situation that politicians have got themselves in and are trying to do what they're doing with the sort of, not necessarily the best intentions, but, they back themselves into a corner and they're trying to work with it? Or is this something a little bit more sinister? Is there something more going on in terms of global institutions? You talk about the World Health Organization and those sorts of things. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? And I think this is an important conversation because it's not had at all in the mainstream media. No one really talks about this. But I think from a broader perspective, when you look at the way this whole thing has been managed, and I'll give you one example, which you obviously know quite well. Ivamectin is proven to be a very effective tool of not managing the virus, but it's an early onset. It's something that you can use if you get it early. It has been known to have really, really good effects at minimizing, the severity of the virus. Yet that has been almost made illegal in Australia, from my understanding. So why is this almost rabid desire to get everyone vaccinated, yet we're turning our back? And by the way, ivermectin was formulated in Australia. Why are we turning the back on these not necessarily cures, but treatments for a virus?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and it's going to take me a little while to get to the end of it. But look at this ivermectin situation. At the moment, if you've been caught and diagnosed with COVID-19, there is no protocol for it. You go home and you wait and you hope you don't end up in hospital. Now, what sort of a medical system is that when you've got hydroxychloroquine with zinc and other things, which has proved to be effective for some, ivermectin as well, and a number of other potential treatments, which even if they're not cures, or they're not, the panacea that we're looking for. If they reduce the severity of symptoms, it's better than doing nothing, hanging on and hoping. Why can't you talk to your doctor about it? One person emailed me the other day, said they raised it with their doctor, and the doctor said, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to talk to you about it. They can lose their license, their license to practice, if they prescribe ivermectin for these things. And you'd go, why? Why is that the case? And I can't answer that. There's so many things that we don't know. But also, Greg, there are things that we do know. And you talked about the international institutions, right? The World Health Organization is so crooked and corrupt, it's not funny, right? But you just have to go to the World Economic Forum and see what Klaus Schwab and that are talking about. I mean, they did pandemic role-play scenarios in 2019, just a couple of months before the pandemic came out. We know that their agenda is global socialism. They don't want you to own anything. They want all the elites to own stuff, and you just be a little serf and rent everything and become an economic slave for them. They want people to become dependent. And if you look at the history of Marxism and socialism, they're all the same. All brands are the same stuff. They have the elites. Then they have the dependents, and the great middle class, that bourgeoisie, are the ones that are cut out. That's the small business owners. So they want big businesses in cabal with big bureaucrats and big government, and the rest of us just sort of going along and doing what we're told. That is an agenda. It is absolutely open out there. They are manipulating all sorts of media, and it's hiding in plain sight. Yet you talk about the World Economic Forum, you show them the videos where they're put out saying, the cities are improved because of lockdown, and you are labelled a crank and a conspiracy theorist. What's the real agenda behind it? Well, the same people have been preaching climate change baloney to us forever, that we've got to deindustrialise and depopulate the whole world for the last 15 years. That's been proven again and again and again not to be sustainable in a critical examination of it. The 97% of scientists is a complete baloney, but when you've got Barack Obama repeating that as President of the United States, the world has gone crazy. So it's just an extension of that. It is about controlling individuals. And I want to help people see through this stuff. We don't know what's true, what's not anymore. You've got to do deep dive into the research. You get some of it wrong, but there's enough there to say there is a massive agenda. And I reckon most of our politicians are actually just dopes that have been roped into it, like Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Rope a dope, bring him in, and they'll do this stupid agenda. But I'm sure there are some much higher up the pecking order internationally who have an orchestrated campaign to implement this across the world.
It's interesting you say that, the way to, I guess, fight this is to bring it out in the open and talk about it and make people aware of it, or as aware of it as we can. And I guess that's what partly you're doing through the Cory Bernardi Confidential. Now, you started this up. One of the benefits of lockdown, I suppose, was that it sort of triggered this idea. Do you want to tell us how you came about writing this daily email?
Yeah, sure. I've been writing a weekly blog, The Weekly Dose of Common Sense, since 2008, I reckon. And we had a very large following, and it would, we'd send out tens of thousands of emails every week. People would respond. And then during pandemic last year, I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? I want to be able to pursue, a career or a business that I can work from anywhere. I'm not going to be responsible to any other individual. And I said, I'm not going to try and save the world. I'll try and help those people who are interested in investing in themselves and to have someone cut through the spin. So I learned how to code. I built a little website and started to write and said to people, look, if you want to benefit from this, I'm happy to share my insights both in business, in politics, and in finance. I've got this history in finance as well. I think I can, help you cut through the BS that's out there. And it's taken off pretty well. It's still a labour of love. I don't make a great deal of money out of it, but I'm making a great number of contacts. People are benefiting from it. We cover stuff like, cryptocurrency, for example, and they've had a good win on that. We talk about health and fitness. We talk about how to build a business and develop it. But most importantly, right now, we're focusing on how you can cut through the garbage that we have been sold through mainstream media. And it is garbage. It is propaganda straight out. They'll do anything to get through it. And, the community that's been built on Cory Bernardi Confidential has been invaluable in distilling information. They find stuff that I don't get. We critically discuss whether things are accurate or they're not accurate. And it's much better when you've got a brain's trust of many that are doing lots of work in it. So I write this daily email, provokes a great deal of conversation. The community is growing, and I'm really enjoying it.
Well, I'm certainly enjoying it as well. And for listeners, we'll put a link at the bottom of this chat in order, if you're interested in checking out what Cory does. You just mentioned, though, that you do discuss finance and you've got a bit of a history in finance. The Rum Rebellion is really about the intersection of finance, politics, and history. Can you tell us a little bit about your financial background and the type of things that you might write about when things like the pandemic aren't taking up your time?
Yeah, when I got sick, I had tuberculosis. I had to get out. We had pubs, and I had to get out of the pubs. That was in the good old days when smoking was still allowed in pubs. And the doctor said, no, you shouldn't be in there with, a lung condition. So I pursued, another labour of love of mine, which was in the stock market. And I started working as a broker. I enjoyed that a great deal, ended up managing money and running a couple of small cap funds before I got into politics, and really enjoyed it. It was, it's always been an interest of mine, a passion of mine. And I think if you can teach people or help people to become more financially aware, better managers of their own money, you're doing them a great service, because no one's going to look after your investments quite like you do. And if you can, once again, cut through the garbage and distill it, it's pretty good. I'm not a trader. I'm, a strategic trend follower, I guess, and I try and identify where the future is and to go along for those rides. So that's a wonderful thing for me. But I just saw, there are times when you get caught wrong, but you look at things and you say, this just doesn't make sense anymore. And I saw that in the pandemic of last year. I started to look at cryptocurrency, and I was very skeptical of, say, Bitcoin, for example, for a very long time. But like a lot of things, if community accepts it and it takes on that legitimacy, well, then you recognise that's the only thing that keeps gold functioning, or any other investment medium, to be honest. So we encourage people to get into that. I got into it myself, and I just report the trades that I do. We're now looking in DeFi and some of the opportunities that are there as well. And once again, I just see the future of the world is going to be digital. I think it's going to be about individual sovereignty. I don't think people can rely anymore on governments. I don't think they can rely on maintaining a job. The middleman is going to disappear over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. And so people have to become creators in their own right and autonomous in the ability to be flexible and to make a business for themselves. So I practice what I preach. I'm putting my efforts and my energies into it. And it's something that I think everyone can do, to be honest. I really think that whether you're a writer or not, you can learn a little bit about online commerce. You can sell products, you can do things, and you can be off the grid, off the radar, make a buck, and live your better life without the intrusions of the nanny state coming your way.
Absolutely. I'd agree wholeheartedly with that. And one of the interesting things about crypto and Bitcoin in that whole space is that I think it is very much a reaction to this government overreach and the I guess centralization of finance around dominant global central banks. And quite clearly they're just trashing the value of the currencies that we transact in on a daily basis. So this is the free markets version, or free markets attempt to create a different system that's based on more fairness and spreading out the wealth to the 99% and not just the 1%. So I think you're on the right track there. I think we'll leave it there for today, but I'm happy to say that you're joining us, I guess, once a week in the Rum Rebellion with an essay. And as I said, for those who are interested, we'll put a link to Cory's newsletter down the bottom of today's essay. Thanks for joining us, mate, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
I look forward to it, Greg. Thanks very much for your time.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening.